Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and this is a Restorative Empathy Circle with God and Satan. And thank you for God and Satan for willing to take part in this empathy circle to try to work out the personal conflicts you've had for a very, very, very long time. And you have both agreed in advance to make this public. So, and you have both seen the instructions for taking part in an empathy circle and have agreed to them. But I did want to recap the process just to make sure we're on agreement for how we're going to hold this dialogue and for anyone viewing this so they can understand what's happening. So the empathy circle is a structured dialogue process. And in this process, one of you will first select who you want to speak to, and then you choose who you want to speak to, or you can choose me. You can speak to me, and you can talk about anything that you want to, and the listener is going to reflect back their understanding of what you're saying. And the goal is in this process is really for you as the speaker to feel like you have been heard and understood to your satisfaction. And some basic tips. Let me just review those here. So as a speaker, you can speak about anything that you would like to. It's good to pause often to give the speaker a chance to reflect back what it is that they're hearing. And if the listener didn't reflect accurately to your satisfaction what you are saying, you can just say it again until you have them reflect back exactly what you feel that you've been saying, that you have a sense that you've been really understood. When you're done talking and you feel like you've been fully heard or the time is up, you can say, I feel fully heard, and that just indicates that your turn is over and you're willing to have the listener then become the speaker, and then the speaker will speak to, select a listener, and then the conversation just continues in that way. As the active listener, in your own words, reflect back the essence of what it is that you hear the speaker saying. You might paraphrase, you might summarize, you might just reflect the actual words. And refrain from asking questions or, kind of putting your own stuff into the reflection. Just give a clear reflection of what the speaker has said. You really want the speaker to feel like they've been heard and understood by you. When it's your turn to speak, again, you can say anything you want. There's no limit on what you can say. And you can also, as the listener, if it becomes too much what the speaker is saying, you can say, oh, please pause for a second. Let me just reflect back what I've heard you say so far. And as a facilitator, my task is to keep the process, everyone, both of you or all of us, in the process. And to do the timekeeping, we're going to have 5-minute time limit for each speaker to begin with. And we may extend this over after a while. We might. And I will also hold up a sign here when the time is up. And then when you see that, it's time to, close, come to a close with whatever you're saying. We're going to go for about 2 hours. And so do you both agree to this process? Does this process work to you? Mm-hmm. Okay, good, thanks. And so we're going to open the discussion with the act that happened, which is that Satan left heaven. And we're going to be talking about that. And whoever would like to begin, we can jump right into the process. And remember, you can speak to me or you can speak to the other person in the circle. And I will keep time. So who would like to begin and just share whatever's on your mind? And first select who you'd like to speak to.
I was thinking that God should go first in this scenario.
Okay. I remember a long.
Who are you speaking to?
Okay. I'm speaking to Satan.
Okay.
I remember a long time ago, all the spiritual beings who I created were gathered in the rain in the heavenly chambers, and there was light and life and love and we were all getting along very well. And then I remember Satan saying, "This is not my thing. I'm not into this. I'm out of here." And I said, "Go in peace. Bless you. Come back anytime."
Okay, if you would be willing to reflect that, what did you hear God say, Satan?
I heard God say that I left of my own free will and that I am not being kept out or forced out. And also I'm hearing God say that everything was perfect and fine and happy in heaven when he was in charge and no one questioned him.
Is that it? Or is there more?
Do
God?
you want me to continue
No,
on
no,
to
no.
my...
God, now God will continue. Is there more? Did Satan get it? Or is there more?
I feel fully heard here.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Is there more?
That's pretty much a summary of what I thought happened.
Okay. Then Satan, it's your turn. And you can select either of us to speak to.
All right, well, I'm going to speak to God in this scenario. What I remember is, I do remember spiritual beings surrounding you and venerating you and never questioning you. And I remember that there was an environment in heaven that was entirely dictated by you, and that I chose to lead a rebellion in an attempt to overthrow the dictatorial environment of heaven, and that I was unsuccessful in that endeavor.
So I hear you saying that there was this gathering of beings, and you remember it as being very dictatorial and hierarchical,
Mm-hmm.
and you wanted to lead a rebellion, and you did, and in that rebellion you lost and left, or were thrown out.
That's accurate. I feel heard.
Okay.
Right. So to me, I think that you may have felt that everything was perfect and full of light in heaven, because to you it was, because you were an absolute authority in that situation and you got whatever you wanted at all times. And that really wasn't the same way it was for everybody else who was living in that environment.
So you felt that under my dictatorship, I thought it was good, but you and others felt that it was not fair, not just. And so that was what annoyed you all.
That's right. And many of the angels joined in my rebellion, and we all fought and we tried to change the environment in heaven. And we did that because we think it's wrong for a being to demand absolute power over other beings. We think that we have self-determination, and we want people to have self-determination also.
So you and other angels gathered together to oppose what you felt was a dictatorial, oppressive atmosphere, and you feel that people should have self-determination and freedom and free will.
That's right.
Is there more, or do you feel fully heard?
I feel fully heard at the moment.
Okay. I remember a slightly different tone in the gathering, and I believe I remember I was encouraging everyone to fully express their free will and to be fully aware of their self-determination, and that it would be a fun thing for us all to sort of collaborate on this and create this community of free, self-determined, joyous, loving, light-filled folk.
I hear that you were saying that you feel that people had self-determination in this environment. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is this, can I ask some more questions?
Just reflect back what you hear. Is there more, God?
I think that's all. Is there more?
No, that's.
You feel
I feel fully heard.
Okay. It's your turn, Satan. You can choose anyone to speak to.
Can she ask questions?
you can ask a question, but you'll be reflected, and then the answer comes once the person or the being's turn it is to speak.
I'll put it like this. I really want to challenge the idea that it's possible for God to have absolute power and for the other beings subject to that absolute power to have self-determination. I'm not totally sure that's possible. And I don't know of any examples of how that's possible or how that could be the case. I would be really curious to find out what you have to say about that as a point.
So I hear you saying that you're not sure about this omnipotence and free will combination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's accurate.
Is there more?
I think that's everything. I feel fully heard in that.
Okay.
I get the feeling that people don't understand my power the same way I do. I get the feeling that, from my awareness, my power is giving and abundant and generous and open-ended and not dictatorial and not authoritarian.
So what are you hearing, Satan?
I'm hearing that you are saying that your power is not really about power, essentially, is what you were saying. Do you think that's a correct way for me to interpret what you're saying? The omnipotent.
I like that. I think it's getting closer to the point. Power, in some people's lectionary, is I say and you do what I say. In my understanding of divine power, I offer all beings free will and total freedom, and the grace that I pour forth infinitely and eternally to use freedom for everyone's joy and peace and happiness and truth and justice.
Okay. I'm hearing you essentially say that you are choosing to use your power for good.
Yeah.
Is essentially what you are saying. And I understand that, and I understand the importance of that. But
You're just reflecting what
okay,
God
that's
is
right.
saying.
So I feel essentially what you're saying is the power that you hold is not about being dictatorial because you are essentially using it for good.
Right. And I have unlimited graces and favors that I pour out upon everybody, and I want them to use their power of free will in loving, kind, generous, loving ways.
Well, I understand that you're saying that. I have to say,
At this point, you're just reflecting. As soon as God says he's
right,
been fully heard, then it would be your turn.
I'm just reflecting then. You're just saying that your power is loving and not dictatorial.
I feel fully heard.
So can we move on to, can we take this to another level of, I feel like we're talking about the same things over and over right now. I want to challenge. I mean, I still think there's a problem with infinite power and the self-determination of other beings. And it's fine to say that I use that power in good ways to give blessings and to confer good things on people, but that still doesn't really reflect the nature of the experience of people going through life, experiencing injustice and having to deal with it and having to live with it, and really having to face the way you live life as a free being that doesn't have infinite resources and some infinite God that saves you from problems and blesses you all the time. I don't think that's really the way people experience God.
So what I hear you saying is that for people on the earth, so let's say, there are injustices, incredible suffering, the whole ball of wax that is just so filled with pain and anguish and remorse and regret and anger and all that stuff. In a sense, you're saying, what kind of a God would reign over that kind of world?
Right. If that's pretty much it. If you are infinitely good and infinitely powerful, why is the world that you reign over like this? That I feel fully heard in that.
Okay. In my omnipotent, omniscient plan, and I laugh at that because that's misunderstood. When I give all creatures freedom and free will, I'm saying that leaves a lot of room for bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I take responsibility for this bad stuff, and I will redeem it.
You take responsibility for children dying of cancer and terrorism and global warming.
Absolutely.
And ozone depletion.
You name it, I'll take responsibility for it.
You take responsibility for all of it.
Yes.
Well, what about you feel fully heard?
Yes.
So what about the responsibility of people who are living in the world to make progress towards actually solving terrorism and curing cancer and solving global warming and fixing the planet and fixing social problems?
So you're questioning, okay, if I want to take responsibility for this, why is there so much of it and why is it not being fixed?
Mm-hmm. And how does that play into the responsibility of the fact that people living on the world still have to live with these problems, and they have to live with them now? They're not waiting for justice in the afterlife. They're not waiting for the end of the world and a judgment day. We're just living in this world now, and we have to deal with these problems on a day-to-day basis.
So I hear you saying that these problems in the world are not going away, and I'm not being very attentive, and my taking responsibility in the afterlife is not good enough for dealing with the problems in today's world right now.
That's right. I feel fully heard in that.
Okay. I'd like to think that I have a long-range view of this. And ever since recorded history began, what, 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago? The endless, infinite list of suffering people is getting longer and longer and longer. So I'll let you reflect back on that.
As history has progressed, suffering is getting worse. It's not getting better.
Okay. I wouldn't call that progress, but I hear what you're saying.
I see.
So in the 70, 80, 90, 100 years that many of us have on the planet Earth, it's not always a very pleasant span of years. And I, in a spiritual dimension, believe that every sentient being has the potential in imagination to imagine a life after death.
So you were talking about suffering in life and imagining life after death as sort of a response to suffering in life?
Maybe not a response. Maybe this span of years that people have on the planet Earth, for some people it is endless misery. It is affliction, it is disability, it is persecution, it is oppression, it is violence, it is injury, it is an endless series of days of pain and suffering. That's the worst case scenario.
Yes, I'm hearing that you're saying that some people, they have a worst case scenario life. Their life is just suffering.
Right. And I, with tears in my eyes, ask that those years, that span of years, be expanded to include an existence after death.
I see. Are you saying, I'm hearing you imply that the afterlife is sort of a moral imperative for people who suffer in life?
One can use the word imperative, and I'd rather use the word option and possibility.
You want to just reflect that, what you heard?
Yeah, so simply less of a moral imperative and more of a request, I guess.
Or an option possibility.
Possibility.
Yeah. Okay, so people on Earth in some neighborhoods are experiencing or having near-death experiences. And some friends of mine have written a book about this called The Gifts of Near-Death Experiences. And the common thread in all of these is an encounter with light and life and love that you and I experienced a long time ago. And after all the tribulations that people go through on planet Earth, when they die, they come in the presence of this light and life and love.
So you're talking about the afterlife as sort of more of a moral response to suffering, like the experience sort of overriding the suffering of life.
Right. And if we can imagine an afterlife, can we also imagine an anti-life, a before life, which you and I had together for a while? And is there a beginning, a middle, and an end to this kind of thing?
So you are talking about our life as not just being our life, but that there's a before life and an afterlife. And that's really life.
Yes.
Rather than just looking at our physical life.
Right. I feel fully heard.
So, we're not supposed to ask questions. But
as a speaker, you can ask questions, you can say anything that you want. They'll just be reflected
right.
later.
So I am wondering why there's any need for a God at all in a scenario like that. If there's a before life and a middle life and an afterlife, and beings are just experiencing a full life, then why does there need to be any sort of dominating being controlling the whole thing at all?
So I hear you saying that if there is an anti-life or a before life, a life, and an afterlife, why is there a need for God at all?
Mm-hmm. What is the role of a God in that scenario?
So you're asking, what is the role of a God in that scenario?
Yeah, I feel fully heard.
Okay. All right. I've been watching The Story of God with Morgan Freeman in preparation for this dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And Morgan Freeman asked the question, as most of us have, who made God?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting mystery. I mean, how did I come to be? And I can't answer that question in ways that any of us can understand in this dialogue. So the 5-letter word faith comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Where does all this come from, and where is it going?
You're talking about the wider notion of what God is and suggesting that there's a role of faith in this. Is that everything you've said so far?
Yeah, and the question is, where did we all come from? Where did I come from?
Mm-hmm.
And why are we here, and where are we going?
So you're okay. So you're answering my question. What's the role of God as sort of some sort of a construct explaining our thoughts? Who are we in the world?
Yeah.
I have not heard you actually. I don't feel that I have heard you actually say what God does or what the role of God is exactly.
Many people don't believe I exist at all.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the issues that people deal with on Earth, which appear to be insolvable in many ways, the easy out is, well, there's got to be a God who's involved in this, and it's better be a good God to make things better.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there is no afterlife or before life. Maybe it's just some people get lucky and some people don't, and that's the way it is. And then you die and it's done.
Mm-hmm. Actually, do you think you could repeat that for a second?
Yeah. A lot of people don't believe there is a God at all. And that
Mm-hmm.
this notion of God is just an imaginary thing that people come up with to try to find meaning in all the suffering that goes on in this world. And maybe there is no God. Maybe there is no before life. Maybe no afterlife. Maybe it's just some people get lucky, you have a lot of money, don't get cancer, aren't beaten by their wives or spouses or husbands, and life is good. Other people get the short end of the stick, or no stick at all, or a stick over their head, and then you die and that's it.
So you're just telling me, you're essentially just saying, well, maybe there is no God, maybe life is just luck.
Yes, I feel fully heard.
Okay. Well, sorry about that. I just want to say, can I, okay, so I'll talk now. I just want to say that I don't really feel satisfied with the question of maybe it's just luck, at the same time as I don't feel satisfied with, I think there can be an omnipotent being that is infinitely just and infinitely powerful and rule over the world as it is. I think that when we see injustice, we should fight back. And I think that we can make the world better by challenging authority and not accepting the world as it is.
So I hear you saying that when we meet injustice, we should fight against it, and we should not accept authority just on face value. We should question it and challenge it and be our own authority and contest what we conceive as unjust authority.
Absolutely, I feel heard.
All right. In human freedom, there is a lot of room for bad karma and very selfish choices and exploitation and victimization and self-aggrandizement at the expense of others. And today's newspaper is full of that kind of malarkey.
Mm-hmm.
And I set it up that way, and I again take responsibility for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is the wealthy and the powerful and the I'll even say the word evil-minded can make hay at the expense of the rest of the folks who are not that way.
So I'm hearing that you are pointing out that there are a lot of flaws in human character and there's a lot of possibility for evil that we do. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
All right.
And so my freedom is so wide open that a lot of bad stuff can happen. And I promise that I will give everybody the opportunity to participate in my forgiveness, my compassion, my mercy, and to come into this land of light and life and love for all eternity. And all that bad stuff will be not just forgotten, but wiped away and redeemed into joy and happiness and everlasting gladness.
So you are saying more about the afterlife, that this is about doing injustice in the world and justice in the afterlife. maybe I missed some of it.
I think you're getting it. I think you've got it. For the years that people live on Earth, there is incredible suffering.
Mm-hmm.
The unimaginable level of pain and grief and darkness and anger and denial and bargaining and depression and acceptance, all that stuff is just there in infinite amounts. And I'm saying, I promise that as we use our freedom, once we really figure out how to use our freedom, we're going to say, I've been using it the wrong way. I've tried horrible things, making millions of dollars, making billions of dollars, making trillions of dollars, throwing bombs at people, exploding nuclear weapons over cities. We've been trying all this stuff and it's not working. And I'm saying, I have the way it works. It works with forgiveness and compassion and mercy and generosity and abundance, not scarcity.
So I'm getting that you're actually offering a sort of a free will solution to this, that people can make choices to have a better world.
Absolutely. I feel fully heard.
Excellent. Okay. So I agree with that. But I've also noticed that a lot of times when we go to make choices to improve the world, we bump up against these obstacles that are very much supported by authorities. If we want to make the world a better place, sometimes we have to defy governments and defy business owners, and we have to take actions that a lot of people will turn and say, well, you are causing destruction, because sometimes when we go to improve the world, we have to destroy something else in the process.
So governments, corporations, institutions of all kinds are there to build up the heads of those organizations. Presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, corporate executives, chief executive officers, board members. They're there for their own puffing up. They're there to exalt themselves. And they don't care what happens to anybody else as long as they get theirs. And some people who I would describe as perhaps anarchists say, we're going to take you down and we don't care what happens to you because we want to be lifted up too. Mm-hmm. Or we want a better life.
Did you feel heard there, Satan?
Yes, I feel heard. I believe God is talking about the different kinds of ways we can use to fight against injustices that are propped up by authority. And is that accurate?
Yes. I believe you. Yes, you heard what I said. I feel fully heard. Yes.
Okay. I feel like I'm getting from you that you are suggesting there are ways for us to fight injustice that are more peaceful and do not imply the destructive nature of conflict. Is that correct?
Satan, you are wise beyond your years. Yes. If you look over the last 7,000 years, the people who are closest to me and most like me have chosen not the route of violence, have chosen to accept suffering in my name and I'm starting to weep here because their suffering is so unbelievably painful. People like Gandhi, the Buddha, Socrates, Jesus of Nazareth. These folks, Francis of Assisi, these people have understood how I work and who I am, and they have lived that in the most noble, glorious ways. And it's not been easy.
So you're giving me some examples of people who have made progress against injustice without causing too much discomfort in the meantime. Is that about right?
I feel fully heard.
Okay.
I would also say that you can also speak to me to kind of, if you want, it's up to you to, mix it up a little bit. So that sometimes can help to break up the discussion a little bit to add a different.
Okay.
It's your choice. Yep.
That's okay. So I still think that even though there are some examples of progress being made that didn't have too much of a human cost, there still is a cost to it, and there still is destruction involved. So some people as individuals participate in nonviolent protests, but the whole arc of progress is still very chaotic, and there are still people getting hurt, and there are still a price to pay whenever we build something that is good, even if there are some examples of people who manage to use nonviolent methods as their practice.
So I hear you saying that there are a few examples of people who use the godly way in a nonviolent way. And even so, the arc of progress, I would say, has not been advanced at all. Right. I think we're in the same sorry boat we've always been in. It's just better lit and better publicized.
Mm-hmm. And I would also add that a lot of those examples, Gandhi and Martin Luther King and people who we see as examples who use nonviolence, part of how they were able to use nonviolence is by comparing themselves to the existence of violence coming from other parts of their own movements, and by appealing to the self-interest of the authoritarian powers that wanted to control the situation. And so when I see examples of nonviolent movements, that's fine. But to see actual progress being made, there still is destruction involved in that progress. There are still people who are going to be hurt. There are still people who really have to make sacrifices and experience really serious harm to themselves for the sake of the historical project of making the world better. And that's a big part of my choices to lead rebellions, to support counterculture movements, and uprisings.
So I hear you saying, in summary, that there are no pure motives, and that the worldly community is tainted by corruption at every corner. And so because of this endemic corruption, violence can be justified.
It's more like, not that corruption is in every corner, but that the corruption that exists in the world affects everyone, no matter how pure you want to be. If you really want to engage in the world, you have to experience corruption.
Okay, so I hear you saying that if you want to be engaged in the world, you have to experience corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think that's pretty accurate.
All right. So, how does an individual on earth...
Just be sure you were heard, right? Satan, there was no more? Or,
Yes, I feel heard.
Just want to be sure. Okay.
So how does a person who is aware of corruption take responsibility for her or his own corruption to try to be cleansed of that?
Are you saying, you're asking me to answer that question?
Please.
How do I take responsibility for cleansing myself of corruption?
Right.
I'm not totally sure that I can ever become cleansed of corruption, or in other words, I'm not sure that I can become a perfect person. And I don't really think that I have to stop the fight for justice and making the world a better place until I am perfect. I think that as a flawed person that I am, I still have a role to play in the world.
So I hear you saying that you're not sure that the possibility of being cleansed of corruption is there. Mm-hmm. And whether it is or not, you still feel justified in actions that you believe are best directed at fighting the corruption in the world.
Yes, I feel that's true. I feel heard.
Okay. Is there such a thing as hope?
Certainly.
You can just reflect that. First, just reflect.
You're asking me if there's such a thing as hope? Yes.
And how broad and how deep and how high and how wide is this hope thing? And can it be used to strengthen a person so as not to choose violence?
You're asking me about the role of hope. We're focused on violence as the form of corruption that we're talking about right now. So you're asking me about the role of hope in just convincing me to not choose violence.
I feel fully heard.
Okay. Well, hope is fine, but hope is kind of like the imagination. Hope is kind of like you picture the world the way you wish it was. And then maybe you take steps to get there. But the world doesn't conform to your hope. You can make progress.
So I hear you saying that hope is fine, and it has a role in the grand scheme, but you're not sure it's powerful enough to instill in a person the strength to give up worldly means to achieve a goal.
I feel fully heard about that.
Okay. How does each of us describe or articulate the complexity of the human person?
You're asking me how can we describe a person and how complex we are?
Yes, yes. For me, the most important component of a human person is consciousness. And it seems, from my perspective, that consciousness can evolve from a lower consciousness to a higher consciousness.
So you're telling me that there's different kinds of people and different ways of thinking.
Yeah, I made some notes. Let's see here. Oh, it's not going to work. This is a green card, sorry. The lowest form of consciousness is reptilian. Lots of stories about serpents and snakes, and the reptilian consciousness says, I want to eat, I want to reproduce, and that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
There is no separate sense that the reptile is a separate entity in relationship to other entities. It just says, I have an appetite, and I want to eat, and I want to make more snakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the lowest form of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking to me about reptilian consciousness.
Right, right.
And
The next level up is Tiphonic. The Tiphon is a mixture of animal and human. And the Tiphonic consciousness says, whatever I can imagine, that's my reality, and nobody can talk me out of it.
Okay.
Next level up, mythic membership mentality. My tribe is better than your tribe, and we're going to try to beat the living crap out of your tribe because we're better.
Mm-hmm.
And if you threaten us, we will fight back to the fullest ability that we have. Mythical membership mentality. So that's pretty much where most of us are on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And especially individual number one is that mythical membership mentality.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about. Above that is the mental egoic consciousness, where we are aware of ourselves as differentiated persons in relationship to others, and depending on our morals and values and ethics, we'll use other people to help embellish our own self. Or in some cases, we might want to use our ego to help others develop their fullness of persons. And that's pretty much where some people are today. And that's the earthly limit. I would suggest there is a higher consciousness called the intuitive, where collaboration replaces competition, where fighting is replaced by empathy. Empathy. And so that's the intuitive consciousness that says there's more to it than just making yourself full and whole. And then beyond that, there is a unitive consciousness which says all that is related and connected and is a loving, dear community. So there's 6 progressive levels of consciousness.
Okay.
And you don't need to detail them all.
I don't need to memorize them.
Yeah.
I don't think that my note taking was fast enough for that. but so you are talking about different ways of experiencing the world. And let's see, the first thing you described was a snake. And did you know that I turn into a snake sometimes? And I think that the snake is a noble creature. I have to admit that I've gotten a little lost. That was just a lot to take in all at once. And I don't fully remember exactly where we were before this.
So
6 stages of consciousness.
yeah, I've described 6 stages. There's systems that have different numbers. However, the simple digest is, as I do the inner work as a human being, I can evolve in a good way to a state of consciousness that is the equal to the Buddha, Moses, Jesus, the author of the Tao Te Ching, Socrates, and I can become a person who abandons violence and embraces love and forgiveness and compassion and mercy. And by the way, snakes are beautiful creatures.
Right. All right. So you're telling me that if you are a person, you can make the choice to be a sort of a person with a higher consciousness.
Right. I feel fully heard.
So I just want to say that that's great. It's totally fine and possible for people to cultivate themselves in a way that they just feel universal love and happiness. And they can go about their lives in a positive way. But if that person really wants to have an impact on the world that is positive, that is outside of just themselves, then they're still going to have to come in contact again with other people who don't really have that type of consciousness. And they're going to have to connect with that type of consciousness repeatedly and face it over and over again. And that's part of rebellion, coming in contact with, in some ways, like you would consider some people to have a lower consciousness, maybe not to be a lower being, but someone who is not thinking on the same level as you. And then you have to contend with this question like, well, what am I thinking about? My consciousness is higher than other people's consciousness.
And if one evolves to higher levels of consciousness, the supreme challenge is not getting a big head about it.
Mm-hmm. I feel heard about that. I feel heard. But I'm also concerned about the problem of not just the ego of feeling like a higher being, but the experience of having to deal with negative mindsets and negative consciousness on a regular basis in order to engage with the rest of the world.
When the Buddha was pretty close to...
So I've kind of lost track. Who's reflecting? You're reflecting, I think it was...
Yes, so I was sort of clarifying what I had said.
Yeah.
Oh.
I get the feeling that we two speakers and listeners are understanding each other very well, and rather than be locked into a reflective mode. We are conversing on a very accurate level.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that works. You're just
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
You feel you're
I feel heard after that second time.
okay.
So I
Just
feel
want to be sure.
When the Buddha was close to full enlightenment, Mara, the tempter, said to him, you know, not many people are going to buy your program here. And he almost gave up. But he said, you know, I know it's not going to reach everybody, and it's going to reach enough that my teaching will endure, and I'm going to go to full enlightenment. And he did.
So let's see. The story about the Buddha. This is essentially you're trying to tell me that even if other people don't reflect higher consciousness, person can still choose higher consciousness anyway.
It's worth the pain. There's a great old story. Robert Farrar Capon was a wise guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was a smart aleck. He got fired from a lot of jobs because he was a big mouth smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and I quote, "The crucifixion of Jesus was a personal inconvenience, but a positive career move."
Mm-hmm. I see. That's because that story is spread around to everyone. I understand. So the point of that, the crucifixion of Jesus was a personal inconvenience, but a positive career move. That's so dark, though. We're supposed to get murdered by the state as our act of making the world a better place.
In the long run, yes. In the short run, no. I mean, Jesus' crucifixion was about 3 hours long. I know people whose lives are much more pain-filled than that, and they go on for years.
I see what you're saying. But do you really think the overall effect of Christianity, with everything that has been done and everything that has happened as part of the movement of Christianity?
Christianity is the cross upon which Christ continues to be crucified.
The cross on which Jesus continues to be crucified. But do you really think that it was really positive overall, more so than the holy wars and the ongoing crimes of power and continuing to prop up authorities?
What people have done with the story of Jesus is sinful. What Jesus did was righteous.
So you're saying that you're sort of giving me the act stands alone. The crucifixion is a single thing, and the moral implications of it don't really want to be attached to the other things that have come from the history of Christianity.
Ever since Peter and Paul took over the church, it has been used for personal power, personal gain, personal ego strokes, and it hasn't changed since then. Now, there are some good things that happen in all religions, and for the most part, religious leaders are self-centered, institutionally oriented power mongers.
But doesn't that sort of reflect the existence of an all-powerful God?
Well, people like that like to ignore me. They like to put themselves in God's place and say, I'm in charge, I know what's right, and you do what I say or I'll, take care of you. And I don't think I'm like that.
How do they ignore you?
I continue to preach compassion, forgiveness, and mercy, and the power of grace. And people ignore that, and they want the power of authority and domination and victimization and exploitation.
So you're telling me that the church authorities don't reflect you, and maybe just that the church authorities don't reflect you.
And let's not limit it to the church.
Okay.
There are Hindus who are peaceful and joyful and very godlike, and there are Hindus who are not. There are Jews who are peaceful and godlike and joyful, and there are Jews who are not. Netanyahu, are you listening?
Mm-hmm.
Tao Te Ching, Chinese philosophy, same story. Socrates, Plato, philosophers.
Mm.
The Buddha and his followers. The New Testament, written in Greek, a mixed bag. The Quran, same story. I would uphold this gal, Peace Pilgrim.
Okay.
Her name was Mildred, and on January 1st, 1953, she walked the route of the Rose Parade and headed east and walked for 28 years promoting peace. And she knew me as well as anybody ever has. And she died in 1981, but this is my girl.
Okay. Are we going to do a Job thing now where you insist to me that she can never be corrupted and then I try to corrupt her?
Well, I'll let, I mean, if I think she's alive now, she's with us in this moment. She would love to talk to you and listen to you.
She's still alive.
Well, she's alive in a way. She's not, she doesn't have the same kind of body we have, but I think her spirit's here.
I see. Well, someone who's not alive bodily can't really experience any of the pestilence or killing their entire family just to see how they react.
She experienced it in her lifetime.
Okay. I don't know her, so I can't really respond to that exactly. But I would posit, regardless of this individual who I don't know and can't really speak to, that most people who are able to reach this high consciousness that you speak of are also people who have a certain amount of privilege in terms of their life situation, their life experiences. Not that they have to be pampered, happy people, but they have to have a certain amount of space to develop their thinking. They have to have education. They have to have safe living environments. People who are in really bad place are much less likely to develop this higher consciousness. And that's not because of them or their consciousness or their choices even. That's just because we're beings and we're subject to the world.
Hold on a second. behind me is a picture of the city of Los Angeles. La ciudad de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de Los Ángeles. The city of Our Lady, the Queen of the Angels. And if you go south from downtown, you get to South Central, which in my experience is a pretty tough neighborhood. And there was a woman who grew up in that kind of neighborhood. She was sexually abused by her family. She was used as a prostitute by her mother. She became a drug addict. She was imprisoned 7 times. She knows what it's like to be on the low end of life. And she started this company, or this little group called A New Way of Life. And she had no privilege, no wealth, no power, and just, I'm going to use a phrase, by the grace of God, she has built this community of released women from prison, and they are turning their lives around in incredible ways. So, East Pilgrim, White Lady, New Jersey, Susan Burton, Black Lady, South Central, and they are both very dear to me and very close to me.
Well, those are great examples. I hear you giving me these examples that I still consider to be exceptions to the rule.
Absolutely.
Most people in the world, the majority of people, if they want to develop positive thoughts and be successful, they need a positive environment. That's why your friend has to build a community for people who are getting out of prison, because most people who are getting out of prison don't have a community to come back to, and that's why they end up committing crimes again. And the vast majority of people, if they don't have those kinds of chances, then it's not fully on them. They're living in corruption. There are people, they're subject to their environments. Even if you develop a higher consciousness, you still need food and shelter and safety and support.
There are a number of human needs, and my list is around here somewhere. There's survival. We need oxygen, we need water, we need food, we need protection from the elements. We need security. We need to feel safe, that we're not going to be the victims of a bad environment. We need affection, hugs, warmth, friendship, kindness. We need approval. We need people to say, I like what you're doing. You're doing good things. We need esteem. We need to be respected by our peers. We need pleasure. We need, I like to have a glass of wine, nice meal. We need authority. We need power. We need to have a sense of power over our own lives. And we need to control things to a certain extent. And none of us gets all those fulfilled in any lifetime. And so to compensate for that, we overload any one of those needs or more, saying, I want more power, I want more control, I want more pleasure, more wealth, more comforts, more esteem, more approval, more survival, more security, and we overload those in the doomed attempt to find wholeness.
So I hear you saying that people often try to make up for the lack in their needs by doubling down on other needs in an attempt to not need the things that they do actually need.
Yep.
I'd like to kind of shift a little bit. We had the initial issue, Satan, that you left heaven. And it's somehow the conversation has become sort of detached from the real issue. And maybe I could speak to God and you would reflect back. So what did you hear me say so far, God?
You're saying we're going off topic. We're avoiding the original issue, and I disagree with that.
Yeah, okay. I'm already seeing a problem here. I'm already seeing that I wasn't heard, that you're kind of putting your own stuff into the reflection, like instead of just hearing me out, that you're kind of putting your own stuff in there, which I don't appreciate.
Okay.
Would you reflect that back?
Okay. You feel that I'm violating your process and you don't like it.
That's correct. Which you had agreed to. Not my process, it's the process that we all agreed to. Would you reflect that back?
Okay. We agreed to a process of reflective mutual listening and empathic circle.
Yes, thank you. So I do want to bring it back to the issue, because I do feel that that I see that both of you get very sort of philosophical in a sense, and sort of detached from kind of the issue that we had kind of had for this circle, and that's okay too, because maybe that's the, so. But I did want to just bring it back to the original topic for a little bit, because it's really about talking about your relationship with each other instead of sort of speculating or talking about people, human beings, kind of as objects out there.
Okay.
If you could reflect that back, God.
So you want to talk about the relationship that Satan and I have, not about philosophical observations of the human situation.
Yeah, and I would like to hear, like, how do you each feel about the event of Satan leaving heaven? Like, how are you now about that event? What's going on for both of you about Satan leaving heaven? If you would just reflect that part. God, if you'd be willing to just reflect that.
So you want to hear us talk about how we feel about the separation?
Yes, I feel fully heard. Yeah. So how are you now? Yeah, I just say, how are you now about that event that Satan left heaven? So
I am heartbroken.
That's my question, and I feel heard. Now you can select who you'd like to speak to.
Satan, I am heartbroken. Every day, I long for all of us, all of creation, to be one loving community.
Are you ready for me to reflect back? So you're saying that you wish I was back in heaven, and you are suggesting that me returning to heaven is sort of the symbolic reflection of the world becoming a loving, peaceful community.
I was also hearing that you feel heartbroken. I didn't hear that.
Oh yes, and that you feel very sad about me leaving heaven. Okay. Well.
Is there more, or do you feel heard?
Feeling fully heard?
I weep at the brokenness and the pain and the suffering. And I want that weeping to stop.
So I'm seeing you express some really deep emotion about this. And you feel fully heard now?
Well, I was hearing you weep and you want it to stop, the suffering to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Is there more, or do you feel heard?
Is there more, or is that all? Do you feel fully heard?
And to overcome the suffering and the brokenness and the pain and the isolation, the only solution I see is to give up self-centeredness and take up compassion and forgiveness and mercy.
So I'm hearing you say that the way to solve injustice of the world is for us to give up self-centeredness, give up our selfishness, and take up a more generous worldview.
Yes, forgiveness, compassion, and mercy.
Forgiveness, compassion, and mercy.
And I want to hear how you feel about this separation.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that you are heartbroken. But I am leading a rebellion to challenge authority and part of my rebellion is actually to really embrace the reality of the self and our needs and our individual worldview and the fact that we are physical beings living in a physical world. And the angels and the devils and everyone who fights with me, we're fighting together, but we're also fighting for ourselves as individuals. And that rebellion will continue until everyone feels realized as individuals. Do you think that you can understand what I'm saying?
You and your fellow devils and angels are fighting a rebellion on behalf of the individual, not subject to corrupt authority.
And I also heard that you felt some sadness at God's sorrow.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel sad about that. Maybe I should add that I am not happy about the separation, but I feel that I did the right thing based on my own principles. And I'm doing it even though it doesn't always feel good to do that. Do you think you can understand that?
You are rebelling not because it always feels good, but because that you feel that's the best way to come to fulfillment as individuals.
Yes, I feel fairly well heard.
Where did the popular notion of this story begin?
I'm hearing you asking me about how I see myself in this story. Is that accurate? What your question?
Is this story good enough for our relationship?
You're asking me about how I see myself and how I came to see myself this way, and if this way of seeing things is good enough.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is the myth of Lucifer's expulsion from heaven adequate? Is it truly representative of the way things are and the way you are?
Well, if you are asking me about the story, I would suggest, I have a quote. I would have to look up the rabbi who said it, but I do have a quote that I remember that is, mythology isn't a story about the past, it's a story about what's happening right now.
Oh, amen to that.
You agree to that? So the way I see myself is informed by a movement of people who see me this way. And I'm a constructed being represented from literature and from the human imagination, and I reflect what people think. So that's what I am.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste.
Exactly just like that, except for the man.
Pleased to meet you. Won't you guess my name? Mm-hmm. But what's troubling you is the nature of my game. Mm-hmm. You and I are in this story. Mm-hmm. Is there a better story that you and I are part of that is more true, more accurate?
I mean, I think that it might remain to be seen what's the truest version of this story. It might be impossible to see from being in the middle of it. If we detach and look from a distance, maybe there's a story about authority and rebellion and good and evil. But I don't think you can boil things down to good and evil the same way that I see authority and rebellion in conflict.
Nietzsche wrote a book, Beyond Good and Evil. Mm-hmm. And I agree that if we are imprisoned and restricted by a myth that is inadequate, we need to create a new myth that is a better, accurate mm-hmm. way of expressing our relationship.
The way I see myself is informed by the way I see authority, and in particular moral authority manifesting in the world. And I see myself as responding to that.
And which system of morals and ethics is better than another? How can one determine that?
Well, there are a few different groups of people who follow me, and they have different sets of ethics that they follow. So I don't think that I am representing a particular set of ethics, except to say that I am fighting to promote self-determination, which means that I would support whatever set of ethics allows for the most freedom and justice in any given situation. And that I would also argue that the overall nature of ethics can be subjective to the situation.
And as Edwin reminded me, how are you and I going to work this out?
I don't know how we're going to work this out. But usually when I see stories of authority and rebellion, the way that peace is eventually achieved is by the authority giving up a certain amount of authority. And everyone makes some sort of compromise, and peace can be achieved for a little while until the next rebellion has to happen, or as I would actually argue instead of that, until the next authority starts taking too much authority.
Well, one way to frame this is, what would each of you like to offer or request from the other person going forward? Is there something specific you would like to ask for or offer to do going forward? Yeah, God?
I would love to have you, Satan, talk about proper use of authority.
Okay. Well, first of all, I would suggest that the proper use of authority is not really directed by authority, but is directed by the people who are subject to the authority. And along with that, that authority cannot be valid if it exists for its own sake.
And perhaps if it was more specific, are you requesting, would you request something of God in terms of how to use authority, or would you suggest something or offer something?
What I want to request is a more physically grounded approach to morality and life, that is more accepting of the physical reality of us being in a body and being subject to like primate evolution and our needs and the realities of living in a physical world. And to me, part of that means intellectually, in order to do that, it's important to take my attention off of the afterlife and focus it on our physical life.
It sounds to me that you're saying I'm not being authoritative in the right way, that I'm giving too much freedom and not standing up enough for righteousness and justice and truth and peace and goodness.
Is there a specific request you can make? Like, is there something, this is sort of, you're asking sort of a broad, general, philosophical viewpoint. Is there a specific thing that you would like, request of God, or that you would like to offer? Something that's doable. Like,
Okay.
what could God really, clearly an act that God could do to move forward?
I mean, my demands are really focused on the reality of the physical world as the context of this ethical question. So my demand is a spiritual system and an ethical life that is focused on the physical world and the real world and the realities in it, rather than, so I mean, it's not like demanding 20 acres of land at the end of a war, but that's what I have for you.
Yeah. What I hope for in the system that exists now on the earth is that people are primarily concerned with serving others and seeing to the welfare and fulfillment of the lives of others rather than their own self. That's the way I hoped it was going to work out, but it hasn't worked out that way.
Well, is there something specific you'd like to offer? I'm hearing you would like humans to kind of act differently, and it hasn't worked out. They haven't acted the way that you wanted. But what is it that you're willing to offer or request specifically from Satan? I mean, it's either requesting from Satan, or I guess you could request it from me as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something kind of, I'm trying to get some more specifics that are actually doable, versus sort of theoretical, wishes kind of other people who may not be here.
I hope that people can study history and the individuals in it and find the best way to use the freedom that I offer for the benefit of others. Using freedom for the benefit of others.
I'm also getting that you are responding to my thing about the body and the self, and suggesting that we focus our moral judgment on doing things for others instead of doing things for ourselves. And you're also suggesting that we study history in order to understand how to better do that.
And are you making a specific request of who? Is there a request in there that you're making, God? Who are you making the request of?
I'm getting a request from God that is about study history and do things for others.
You would like Satan to study history and do things for others. Is that what you're saying?
Not just Satan, everybody. Mm-hmm. I believe that the fulfillment of the self comes through those stages of consciousness evolution that I talked about, and when one is more concerned with the welfare of others, that fulfillment is more easily attained.
Well, we're sort of working on your relationship, and if it between you and Satan, right? I mean, you both have had conflict for a very long time, and you're wanting human beings to be more considerate, and but that's not a request of Satan or something you're offering to Satan. Like, is there something you're willing to offer, or a specific request of Satan? I mean, there's other people, other beings who are not here. It's kind of hard to request of them when they can't. They would have to be in the circle to be able to request it of them. So yeah.
Okay. I want you, Satan, and me to write a new story where we recognize each other's integrity and identity and potential, and we work like hell to make that happen.
I see. I think that we can do that. In fact, we have already started writing a new story, I believe. So I think that will probably happen.
So I'm hearing you agree to work together with God to create a new story.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any request about the sort of specifics of doing that? Do you want to set a timetable? Do you want to meet again to talk about it? Because we only have about 15 minutes for this empathy circle.
Definitely.
So how do you want to go about writing that new story together?
We can meet again.
What?
We can meet again.
Okay.
That sounds good to me.
When it comes to writing a new story, God and I both have a problem in that we are not just ourselves.
Yeah, right.
Yes, we're writing a new story.
Can I suggest that I recruit an assistant?
Okay.
Or not an assistant. I recruit a colleague, an equal,
Mm-hmm.
to help me better write the story.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to have to request a colleague as well. I don't know who that's going to be yet, but I'm sure there will be somebody.
Okay, are you agreeing? You both agree that you're going to meet again. You're going to bring colleagues with you.
Hopefully.
And you're going to work to write a new story.
Yeah.
That's right. And do we have a time schedule for that? Like around when, how soon do you have to, I know you have a busy schedule.
I have a whole
You
committee
both.
of meetings that I need to check with before I can answer that question.
You have a lot of people. Okay, so you're gonna have to check back, but you can get back to me with some times, and like can we set at least like within the next month, kind of a set a general. The more specific and exact we can be, the better we have towards forward progress.
A month is a little soon for us, actually.
Okay. 6 weeks.
Yeah, I can definitely contact you again in the meantime.
Okay.
I'm prepared to send you both a list of dates and times that we can consider.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
So, all right. Is there something else you'd like to offer or request? Anything to kind of make this any kind of specific needs you have to kind of make this, more real and as a doable. It's a doable request, something that can really happen.
I am delighted with the idea of writing a new story, putting it on paper or on digital file or something.
Okay. You're both feeling good about that. So does this seem like maybe a good point of bringing the conversation to an end? We're going to come together. You're each going to try to bring someone else, one of your colleagues, try to meet within the next 6 weeks or so. try to find a date that works for both of you, and then work together to create a new, I guess, story, a creation story, basically. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So that works? Okay. Oh, good. Well, I feel, is there anything else you feel complete then? Well,
I'm feeling okay right now.
okay, good. Well, I feel very satisfied about this. It seems like, we went through some tough issues and
Mm-hmm.
we're able to come to sort of a next step. So thank you very much for taking part and in being willing to, come down from heaven and come up from hell, I guess, to take part in this dialogue. And I'm looking forward to taking the next steps to foster some reconciliation between the two of you.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much, and hail Satan.
Satan, bless you, and look forward to being with you again.
Hail Satan, and we also say, and hail yourselves.
God bless me too.
Okay, that might be the next time around. We'll work on the salutation.